We're here today with the Clerk of the Circuit Court's office to recognize Veterans Day 2022. The Clerk of the Circuit Court has been recording military discharges since 1919 and continues to do so, currently with the Department of Defense's Form DD-214. And we have with us two veterans, Colonel Ken Russom and Captain Thomas Upchurch, to talk to us about their experiences, but also what they would like other Americans to know about serving in the military. But first I wanted to ask you, Ken, because you made the comment, how much you have been asked to use your DD-214 in civilian life.
Yes, that was one of the first documents that I realized was extremely important. Started right here because I came straight after retirement to St. Augustine to work, and I was asked for the DD-214 probably within the first week, and one was to register it with the county. And I since then, I don't know how many times it's either been on a form or certainly they want to see it, so to speak. It's a very important document, and I hope everybody keeps it handy and certainly registers it so they can get to it, so to speak. Yes. Okay,
well, thank you. Well, I'm going to let you all do most of the talking, or talk to each other and share your experiences. You're both were in the Marines. That is correct. And so, Ken, since you were earlier than Thomas, why don't you start?
Well, I think it's interesting. It's kind of like a generational thing to set the stage for me, and then Thomas will have a different approach. As I was growing up, all young men faced what was known as a draft, and you started thinking about a military service really probably as a teenager. I had a cousin that was in the Marine Corps in World War II, went through the Pacific campaign, so I kind of got to the point that I said, yes, I'm going to be a Marine. That was probably when I was in 16, 17 years old, and I thought that was the way it was going to be and the way it should be. Of course, later on, and I was on active duty when all volunteer came in, but it was a time that I think, as a young man, it challenged you to basically confirm your Pledge of Allegiance, I guess you could say, and it wasn't that dramatic, but it did surface early on. And I think now that's something the country is probably working with, and I'm just going to leave it there. But that was a time when I think, in my generation, you did make a decision, and you were aware that you were going to serve your country. So,
if you can you tell us where you served?
Yes. When I got out of Florida State, went into the Marine Corps October of 1964, and to the officers candidate class. That's where everybody goes, certainly, unless you're, I don't know, take Thomas's thunder, somewhere else to get your commission. But it was a good experience when I went there, and you meet a lot of young men who are commissioned. Then you go to the basic training called the basic school in County Clerk, and get your basic training, heavily focused on the infantry, but you are exposed to the entire Marine Corps. And as far as that's concerned, you're exposed to the entire military force structure. And that was the beginning. And I went from the basic school as a second lieutenant, and I was commissioned out of OCS, of course, and went to 2nd Marine Division in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, as an infantry officer. Volunteered. They asked when you came in to the personnel officer said, well, we've got 3 places you can go. One's it's a battalion that won't be going anywhere for a while. One is a battalion that will be leaving for the Med in 5 months. I said, that's the one I want. I was a bachelor, so off we went, and I think it was January. The Vietnam War kind of started coming on the scene. I actually became aware of it when I was probably a junior at Florida State, and it was not on in the conversations really, because it was really not in the press that much. But then it began about 1962, 63, began to catch people's attention, particularly men who were going to face possibly being involved,
Right.
and that was me. So I was I guess I was aware that something was going to happen. All right. So having said that, off to the Med we go. We get off the coast out of Virginia, where we loaded all the transports, the troop ships, and about 3 days later, the ship starts circling. And said, "Oh, what in the world's going on?" Well, the word, scuttlebutt, as they call it, was that we would be turned around, maybe go back to Camp Lejeune, or we would go straight through the Suez Canal and off to Southeast Asia. And the example they gave us was this happened when Korean War started. And as it turned out, we came back to Camp Lejeune, found out we weren't going to be broken apart or going over to Vietnam. So back on the ships, we go to the Med, complete our Med cruise, and this would have been we got back in the fall of '66. Okay, we got back to Lejeune, and then they began to break up the battalion and send everybody off and so on and so forth. They told me I was going to, along with the other junior officers, company grade, off to Vietnam. And I went to an Army school at Fort Bragg, and I was called in, and the senior officer holds up a picture of an aircraft carrier. He said, "No, you're going here." So I went to the USS America for sea duty. And my wife says that was the opportunity. I couldn't get away anymore. So I got married. And that we came back. In fact, she came over and followed the ship for a while. We came back, went to Camp Lejeune, Camp Pendleton very briefly, and then I did go to Vietnam in 1968. Got there late July.
You were there when things really had heated up.
And that was, and interestingly, it wasn't much, so to speak. It was, we knew things were happening. And when I was in the basic school, 65 spring, and we got out in June. But it was like within 5 months, boom, it became much bigger than anybody had thought. Of course, I was a young officer; I didn't know the difference. But all of a sudden, it was a big deal, and so I went over. Was in the 4th Marine Regiment. I had a company starting off with the Alpha Company, A Company, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, and I stayed in the 4th Marines the whole time. After my company, I went up to the regiment level and came home. So
Yeah.
that was, I always say that was probably the most successful tour because I came home. So.
What about you, Thomas?
Yeah, so I think growing up, it's interesting, the generation between, I think, the World War II generation and, the Vietnam generation. My dad was obviously younger than you, so I don't think there wasn't. My grandfather and my great uncle had served in World War II, but my dad didn't. I didn't have any immediate family members who were in the military, uncles, things of that nature. But my grandparents and some of that generation did, and so it was around me when I was growing up. But it wasn't like this sense, and obviously the draft wasn't going on anymore. I'd never really even thought about serving in the military at all. And one day I was exercising at the YMCA. I think I was like 13 or 14 years old, and the war in Iraq, it was the initial push into Iraq was just starting. So I guess this was 2002-ish. So I was 15 years old. And a gentleman named Bruce Hall, who was a Naval Academy graduate, was exercising. And he was like this older guy, always doing pull-ups, and was like really in shape. He was a very nice guy, and he asked me, he said, "Are you thinking about going over to Iraq?" And I said, "Sir, I'm like 14 years old. Like, I'm definitely not thinking about going to Iraq." And he says, "Well, have you ever heard of a school called the Naval Academy?" And I said, "No, sir, I have no clue what the Naval Academy is." He's like, "Well, they're the people that play Army every year in the football game on TV." And I, as a kid, I thought that those were like Navy sailors playing against like Army soldiers in a football game. I had no clue that those were two colleges. And so he said, and this guy, he's pretty ahead of his time. He was like, "Okay, well, I want you to go back to your house, and do you have the internet?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I got America Online." And he said, "Go to navy.edu or usna.edu and check it out." So I went back to the house and I looked at it and I said, the school looks kind of cool. It's cool pictures, cool uniforms. And I told my dad about it. And then my dad told my grandfather, Hamilton, who was in the Army Air Corps during World War II. And that weekend, he bought plane tickets for us to go up and tour the Naval Academy, because he was like, "Oh my gosh, like there's like a spark of interest in my grandson being in the military." So he bought us plane tickets, and we went up that weekend. We toured the campus. We thought it was beautiful. And I said, "Okay, well, I'll consider looking into this further." I applied for a summer program there as like a kind of a summer camp to see if you wanted to go to the Naval Academy. I did the summer camp. I hated it the first couple days. But my dad gave me really good advice driving me to the airport. He told me that I might not like it the first kind of few days that I was there, but he said to give it my best effort, because if by the end of it I did like it, I'd at least have the opportunity that I put in, a good effort, and I did well. And so by the third or fourth day, I really enjoyed it. And so I was glad that I didn't just kind of quit or, gaff it off the first couple days. So then I applied. And I got into the Naval Academy very late in my senior year. I found out actually on my birthday, which was also senior prom, April 16th, 2005. I found out that I got accepted to the Naval Academy. It was my birthday and it was senior prom. So it was like probably up to that point, a pretty significant day in my life. So then a couple weeks later, my buddy shaved my head the night before. A couple weeks later, I was at the Naval Academy, May 22nd, 2005. So I did the Naval Academy. I found out on induction day that I was colorblind. I had no clue I was colorblind up until the first day at the Naval Academy. And I honestly think when I was doing my initial exams, because they're supposed to catch this early on, and I think a doctor, I don't know if he liked me, I don't know if he wasn't paying attention to my test results, I think he just like passed me and said I had perfectly fine color vision. But the first day at the Naval Academy, I found out that I was colorblind. So they told me I basically couldn't do any job in the Navy. I wanted to be a pilot, a Navy pilot. So I couldn't do any cool job as far as I was concerned. I couldn't be on a ship, couldn't be a fighter pilot, couldn't be on a submarine. Well, I don't think that's a really cool job. But all these things I couldn't do, but I could do almost everything in the Marine Corps. I couldn't be a Navy SEAL, but I could do everything in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, we joke around, we only care that you can see, green and tan. And so I could see green and tan. So anyways, I kind of knew throughout my time at the Naval Academy that I was probably going to be a Marine. But I kept trying to pass this color vision test. Well, if you can't like study for a color vision test. You either see it or you can't. So I found out, I really knew my junior year that I was going to go in the Marine Corps. And up to that point, I thought at the Naval Academy, it's weird because the Naval Academy is a Navy school. And so the Marine Corps tries to influence it a little bit, but they don't. They aren't very successful. And so I thought the Marines were kind of like a little bit uptight. They're always yelling at me about my haircut, about my uniform. But anyways, I service selected the Marine Corps, found out that I was going in the Marine Corps. Went to the basic school just like Colonel did. What's unique about the Marine Corps is that every Marine officer goes to the basic school. We're the only service that does that. So all the officers that come in have a common training. The Army doesn't do it, the Navy doesn't do it, so we all can relate to each other and what we did at the basic school. So we were at the basic school. I then got shipped out. I became an infantry officer. I then went to 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines in Hawaii, where I did a deployment to Afghanistan, Helmand Province. I was 22 years old. I was in charge of 70, 80 people in the furthest southernmost U.S. position in Afghanistan. So we were right on the border with Afghanistan and Pakistan. So doing a lot of like interdiction operations for people coming across the border, drugs, terrorists, things of that nature. So that was in 2010, 2011. I came back. I did another deployment to Japan, part of the unit deployment program with Okinawa, and I was an executive officer then. Came back, then went to Washington, D.C., where Colonel and I both served. We were at Marine Barracks, Washington. So
At
we
the
did.
same time.
He visited once when I was there, which was a funny story.
Yeah.
But there I did funerals at Arlington, a lot of state functions with, did a couple with the president, White House, or things. You're kind of you're the ceremonial duty in Washington, D.C. And then after that, I went to the White House military office, and I did all of the security, or helped with all the security at Camp David for the presidential visits and things of that nature. And I got out after that.
Yeah.
Well, those are not quite the same experiences.
No, very different.
Well, I followed his career from the time that he was selected. His dad and I had talked, and I know that he was an outstanding officer, and he made the best decision, and he wasn't influenced by the Navy. Because he should have been a Marine, he was a Marine.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. That's right. Thank God I was colorblind.
Yeah.
I am
It was
colorblind.
meant to be. That's it.
No, really. I mean, I'm so fortunate that I was telling you on the phone the other day. I mean, joining the Marine Corps was one of the top three best decisions in my life.
So what would you say to someone who is 15 or 16 now that's considering
Do it.
military service?
Do it.
Yeah.
That was pretty easy.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, I think today, just like us, so to speak, there's just something in you that, and a lot of times it's associated with athletics, or you're outgoing, or just you're outgoing or something. But there's something in you that you're gonna say, I think I'd like to do this, and I don't know what that means, but I think a person who's cut out for it, so to speak, they're gonna know, and I think that's really the reason the armed forces is still in existence. That something is just, I think it's
So how many years were you in total, Ken?
a little over 27.
And how about you?
8.5.
Okay.
The greatest time going, in all honesty, I went in, although I had, my cousin, etc., who was a Marine, I went in, I really went in for 3 years. I was going to do my tour. I was going to do what I knew I was going to do, that's serve in the military. And when I got in, I'd always thought about, it's just like, kind of pay attention and look around, see what you think. And toward the end of the basic school, my platoon commander cornered me and said, basically, are you interested in any way about being a regular officer? That's what it was for me, because he got it as part of going to the military academy. And I said, I am. He said, well, I want to meet with you and the company commander and all that. So I put my paperwork in and went up to see the CO of the basic school, highly decorated Marine from World War II, and just a super gentleman. And I guess he kind of looks at the profile, and the only thing I had on my resume is I'd been a football coach at Florida State, a freshman coach, and that was because I was trying to get out of school. So they said, well, you got to do something. So they put me to work, and I really just, that's kind of the story right there. I just did what I thought I was going to do, and that was it.
I think too, when you look at not only, when I think about the benefits that the military service, the being in the Marine Corps had for me, it was the greatest adventure of my life. I get chills thinking about it. With the brotherhood and the camaraderie and sisterhood, and just the people that you, the connection that you have with people. This bond is just, it's absolutely unbreakable. I think about my friends and colleagues that I served with. You just develop these relationships, that are so deep and so impactful. So it's the greatest adventure of your life, traveling all over the world. I was living in Hawaii and I was 22 years old. it provides an amazing support system. It's hard. It's very hard on families, but it provides a great support system. You're financially comfortable. You're medically comfortable. Your family gets taken care of. You get to do all these incredible things with these incredible people, and on top of all that, you do feel the strongest sense of I've done my duty. I've served my country. I just can't. And the benefits once you get out. Thank God, I mean, because talking about the difference in the public reception compared to a Vietnam veteran compared to when we came back, just the public support is just overwhelming. You have people all the time. It's almost too much sometimes. I mean, people all the time just saying thank you for your service. How can we help veterans? I mean, the GI Bill, the benefits. It's just out of this world. I couldn't recommend it enough. And you don't. And when you think about being in the military, it's not this like, oh my gosh, I have to do it for 25, 30, 40 years. Just like the colonel said, the best piece of advice I got was you're looking at like 2-3 year commitments every time you accept a new contract. So like it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. I mean that's nothing. I know guys who are 40 who are retired. They have an amazing pension, amazing health care, and they're on almost like cruise control. I mean, it's just an unbelievable life.
Well,
I'd do it again.
I do want to throw in the family, because he's got a wonderful wife and a great family. My wife, her father was an airline pilot, so she didn't expect the man of the house to be at home every night, so to speak. She loved it, and our son, he became a little Marine, so to speak. And the family is so important, and I can understand why, after a certain period of time, it's a decision. But the family is big. The wife for sure, but the kids too. The family is big, and I feel very fortunate.
Well, thank you all very much. It's a very important part of our nation and our society to talk about the military, I think, at a personal level, as well as a very large institutional level. And thank you all for joining us.
Yeah.